Greetings and welcome back to the workbench. Dan here as always. In today's video we're going to be tackling a CSX phosphate covered hopper. This is another car on my long list of cars I've been wanting to do for some time. And as luck would have it, I recently came on a small stash of these Intermountain 4750s painted for CSX in the modern CSX scheme here. Now with the particular car I want to model, I am going to have to do some modifications to the car, and when we compare this to the prototype photos you'll get to see why. But these cars have been around for a little while. You can generally snag them on eBay for 25 to 30 bucks. If you pay attention, you can watch out for them, you can get a few. So this is the prototype car I want to do. This is CSXT 254123. This is actually an X-Chassis System 4750, and this is what I want to try to make. Notice a lot of the grime, the rust, and the different CSX logo there that we're going to try to replicate. The first thing we're going to do is the basic strip down and car body prep. Now what this involves is first off removing the top hatch. On my prototype it has white fiberglass hatches, so I'm going to actually remove the Intermountain hatches here off this car to paint these separately off the car, and then later on during the weathering process we'll reinstall them. With the Intermountain hatches, they are separate parts that you can actually open, which is interesting. It's a nifty little design. So you can see they just come off either in two pieces or individually. You just remove them, and then later on we'll just, like I said, go back and install them. So here we have the completely exposed trough. This will of course make this easier to weather too. If you have any glue residue or anything like that, I just take a glue, or excuse me, you just use the chisel blade like I'm doing there to just clean that off real quick. You'll also notice I've modified the underbays, and I've also removed the trucks, and this is to actually make it more prototypical. The CSX cars have the short hatches, the Intermountain cars have long hatches, so I just simply cut those down and modified them on each corner, of course. Alright, so we're going to go ahead and remove all the lettering on the car, and by lettering I mean reporting marks and the CSX logo there. We're going to be modeling an older car. The version that Intermountain's done here is a more modern repaint, like 2015, 2016 era repaint. So we're going to go back and actually backdate this car a little bit and modify it to make it look like an older repainted prototype. In this case a former chassis car. I just use an X-Acto blade here. I just go in and I simply scrape off the lettering with a brand new sharp X-Acto blade. With Intermountain cars, this lettering, it comes right off. It's actually quite nice on the CSX car. The lettering is super small and super thin, so it lifts right off relatively quickly. There you can see I'm just working it with a gradual motion. I apply a little bit of pressure with the tip of my finger. I just force the blade down into the side of the car, and I just let the blade glide across the surface. Now this only really removes the graphic, and it doesn't really scratch the paint up too bad. It's a very easy way of doing this. It's relatively quick. It's a little messy, but any kind of letter removal in this case is always going to be messy, so be warned. Like I said, all you got to do, you just go in, just remove the lettering like that, in one section at a time. Now the CSX logos were a little bit trickier to get off. Those were a lot harder to scrape, but they came off relatively easy after a little bit of finagling, a little bit of working around with them. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a Q-tip with 70% isopropyl alcohol, and I'm going to go ahead and remove the leftover ink that is still on the surface of the car. Here for the brief demonstration, I'm just going in with a wet Q-tip, and I just very quickly swab the surface that we worked in, and this will smooth things out a little bit. It'll clean up some of the leftover ink. In this close-up shot coming up, you'll see this a lot better. Here you can see I just go in, I rub that Q-tip right over the area where we just scraped off the lettering, and it very easily and very quickly smooths things back out. It removes all the leftover ink and any of the little holograms left over from the pad printing. There you can see it does a very nice job of that. So now we have effectively a clean slate. Same thing with the CSX logo here. This is a little bit more tedious because it's such a large area, and it also overlaps onto the rib in certain parts with the graphic, so it does take a little bit more effort to scrub at, but eventually the ink will lift off. You do got to be careful because you don't want to lift off any of the paint here in this case. Now if you're doing a car like this, you don't have to worry about it too much because we are going to be relatively heavily weathering this thing. So I mean, if we do take a little bit of paint off, it's not the end of the world. It will just get weathered over, but I would like to try to prevent that. So I'm just using minimum pressure here, and I'm just very slowly rubbing the Q-tip over the surface where the decal used to be, and slowly but surely it starts to lift off, and it smudges back out, it smooths back out, and then again we'll have a clean slate ready for decaling. After I've done all the lettering removal, I've sprayed the entire car with gloss coat, Tester's gloss coat, and this is in preparation for the fresh decals. We're going to need to put new reporting marks and new CSX logos on each corner. In terms of minor detailing, what I want to do here is actually add the placards. All of these former phosphate covered hoppers have these placards, even though they almost never carry an actual placard number. They all have the placards fitted to them. And in this case, I'm just using a pack of Detail Associates placards. These are really nice, finely molded parts. These are what you would use for tank cars, but they will also work for this covered hopper. You can see you get 8 pieces, enough to do several cars. And in this case, I just go ahead and cut out 4. So this is going to be enough to do 1 car. We're going to need individual placards for the sides, and then we're going to need the stand-type placards for the ends. And I recommend you do the ends first. There you can see we breezed right through that because it's a little bit frustrating. It's a little tedious, but the sides are a lot easier. All you got to do is go in, add a little dab of glue, and then position the placard into place just like this. Just set it down with the X-Acto blade once you've picked it up, and it'll glue in place very quickly. And then you just do it on the opposite side. Here again, after I've installed them, I've painted them the appropriate CSX tan to paint match all that and get them prepped for weathering. You can see it's done a very good job of that. It's all prepped and ready to go. And we're pretty much ready at this point to go ahead and install decals. And in the new decal process here, I'm going to be using the microscale decal sheet here for the ACF hoppers. You can see the classification. And this sheet has the numbers I need, and it also has the right size CSX large logo that I need for this particular car. And with these early repaints, they put the CSX graphic on the very right hand corner of the car, so right on that end, unlike the later repaints where they positioned it more towards the center of the car. Still in the corner, but more towards the center, if that makes sense, a couple ribs down like it was before. Here you can see I just positioned the decals in place. I then take a flat brush like this, loaded with microsol, and I just very carefully and very slowly set the decal into place, and then I start to sponge it down and secure it over those rib sections with a Q-tip to dry it off. I will then, after this, lay on some Solvaset, Walther's Solvaset to secure it. And then I sealed in place. Now it's time for the grime, and as you can see, the car has a lot of grime that we're going to replicate here. And the first step is to basically take our airbrush, and I'm going to use a little bit of earth brown and flat black acrylic. I've mixed it in, and the first thing I'm going to do is actually paint the kick-up lines and work some of that grime into the end cages. This is generally the hardest area to weather on these Intermountain cars, so I generally try to tackle it first. Basically what I do is I try to paint on the lines on the brake end, and then the opposite end there. I try to get the individual kick-up lines, let it splatter a little bit. Once I've done all that and I've hit it at all these different angles to make sure it's very thoroughly covered, then I can go back in, hit the coupler boxes, I can hit the under bays, I can hit the little seam in between the bays would be the main rib of the car, I guess the underbody support beam. I'm just going to work that paint into that beam, just like I've done on many other 4750s. You just want to hit all this at various different angles. 4750s can be a little bit tricky because you do have some obscure angles to get into, but it's definitely not as bad as, say, doing a flat car or a tank car where you got a lot more obscure angles to work with. You just hit it at different angles until everything's covered. I just try to get a nice even mix of grime on the underbody there to prep it. And then on the underbays themselves, you can see I'm going to try to work up a little bit more of a heavier grime coat on the very base of the underbay, and also on the ends where the wheels would be spraying a lot of that kick-up grime. I'm also going to work on the areas around the jacking pads, for example, on the bolsters. Those are going to be the higher concentrated areas of grime coming up from those trucks. A lot of that road dust, a lot of that grime, it just starts to form and it starts to rot away at the underbody of the car there. Next up, I'm going to go ahead and start working on the sides. And I've went ahead and done a little bit thinner wash, again with the earth brown and black mix. What I'm wanting to do is I'm wanting to grime up the sides and blend in some of our work here. Now, I did dull coat all of our decal work in here before I did this airbrush coat. This is to seal up the decals. So I'm painting over a fresh surface here very easily with minimal effort. The paint applies very well over a dull coated surface. It's actually a lot easier than applying it over a fresh untouched surface, say fresh out of the box. It goes on very nice and even. You just work up and down vertically like this, like I'm doing here. Just go up and down. I just blend that paint out nice and even for now. Any kind of extra heavy rust I'll do with brush later on. I'm just trying to get an even flat coat of grime over the entire portion of the car body here. I'm also going to work some of that grime up onto the roof as well, and in places I'll even it out, say for example on the ends where I need to. The next step here, after I've gotten the grime on the ribbing, I'm now going to go in and clean those back off with a Q-tip dipped in isopropyl alcohol. Now I'm going to go on to the roof, and the roof has a lot of heavy rust patching. This is typical of an older 4750 like this, especially with these old phosphate and grain cars. The roofs start to rot, they start to peel pretty bad, you get a lot of heavy rust. And the way I'm going to replicate this is by making a diluted mixture of earth brown and black acrylic paint. It's somewhat thick. Once I've mixed it with a liner brush, I'll then take a number 10-0 Atlas and another flat chisel type bristle brush like that. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick up some of that fresh paint, and I'm going to start applying it to certain areas around the roof walk. I'm going to make random little patches of rust here. And none of this has to be perfect right now. You don't have to make any of this consistent. Just make random little patches. A small brush like this makes it a little bit easier to be a little bit more precise with your patches, but you can still have some randomness when it comes to the rust. You can see in some spots I'm making it heavier than others, and then in certain portions of the rust I'm fanning it out with a much more gradual brush stroke. You can see again I'm just working that paint out a little bit at a time. As I get underneath the walkway there, tucking that paint in, I'll be a little bit heavier with the application. As we progress, I'm going to start working some of that paint up onto the actual walkway itself, and I'm going to go for a very random chipped effect where the paint has just peeled away and rust is now pretty much taken over. So I'm just going in with a flat bristle brush here, and I'm applying some of these heavier rust patches, and all this can be done within a matter of minutes. Once you do that, I can come in now with a fine tip and do some little dots, and this is just to accent and further detail our already great looking rust here. This gives us a further nice detailed effect to the rust. It makes it look like that we have some individual little rust patches there. Excuse me guys, sorry I got my tongue twisted there. Next up we're going to apply the oils, and I'm going to go ahead and start with some Winsor & Newton Burnt Umber, and this is the tried and true color I use for all of my weathering projects. Here I'm using a brand new flat bristle brush. This is actually to replace the old one that I've had for many years now. What I'm going to do is I'm going to apply a relatively heavy wash of this oil paint to the sides to get us started. And again with this oil, it pretty much starts to set up relatively quick. So you just want to work in small sections, halves at a time I recommend. Start to very carefully work that paint into all the little surfaces on the walkways, on the ladders, on each individual pretty much little panel. Don't worry about getting it on the ribs. We'll clean the ribs back off here in a little bit. All we're worried about is just getting a nice even application of this rust onto the sides. Here you can see I've dipped that paint in a little bit of fresh thinner, and now what I'm going to do is my wavy panel trick here. I'm going to go in and I'm just going to very carefully work upwards towards the roof of the car, and I'm going to start applying this thinner to the sides, and I'm going to just stroke the brush into that thinner to create these little wavy flooded areas of paint to make it look like the panels have collected this grime in this wavy sort of manner. It's very common on 4750s, it's very common on gondolas and boxcars to see this kind of weathering effect. And you can see I'm just going very slowly and very carefully, slowly working that paint up. You can also, of course, go down, which is honestly better, but in this case I was trying to keep my hand away from the camera, so I had it at an angle here where I just decided to work it upwards. Again, that was just solely so I could kind of keep everything in shot for the camera for the demonstration. Otherwise, I would be going straight down with this and letting that paint kind of pool at the base edge, or rather the little ledge at the base of the car leading to the underbody. It's a very simple technique though. You just work that oil in, you get very quickly a nice feel for how the oil is going to work out for you. You just let it pool on the sides and then you just continually work it until you're satisfied with it, like I'm doing here. You just get these nice little waves in the panels and it gives you this nice little random effect where it really looks like a prototypically weathered 4750. After I've done the main base coat of grime, I can now go and switch to doing the underbody. And with the underbody, I'm going to be doing a much heavier application of this oil. Matter of fact, quite a bit heavier. I'm doing a very light diluted wash here, so mainly mostly oil here with just a touch of thinner. Literally just a touch. And I'm using that flat liner brush again to very carefully work that paint into the main beam and onto the underbays. After I've gotten all that done and all that's dried, I can now refocus my attention on the ribs. And what I'm doing with the ribs here is I'm taking a sanding stick, a coarse sanding stick, and I'm running them along the ribs to look like these cars have brushed up against something. This is very common to see these kinds of scrapes on older cars, newer cars. There in a little bit more of a detailed shot you can kind of see what I created. And then what I'll do to further enhance this is I'll then again take that Q-tip, dipped in alcohol, and I'm going to run it down those ribs. And I'm just going to do this very random, applying little bits of pressure here and there, and it gives me this random weathered effect to these ribs that just looks super nice. Now what I'm going to do is apply the oils to the ends, and the first thing I generally do is I try to splatter some of that fresh oil onto those kick-up lines to represent some of the splatter off the wheels, some of that grime that comes up off the wheels. So here I'm using a liner brush and I'm doing a relatively thin wash of burnt umber oil. Again, that burnt umber, it just, man, I'll tell you, it does wonders, just that one color. I work it up onto the ladders, I work it up onto the brake rigging, onto the placards, the coupler box itself. I just try to be thorough with this. I take the time to just work that paint over, and any residual splatter at this point just further enhances the weathering effect on the interior of that end slope. Now with all that being completed, we can now go on to the hatches. Here you can see I've reinstalled them after painting these white. I just used some Tamiya paint. And I'm going to go ahead and start applying some of this oil. Now with the oil, I'm going to be a little bit more sparing on the top part here. I want to just have more of that dry, rotted rust, not so much this fresh rust that I'm trying to recreate with the oils. So with the oils here, I'm just applying these in a random manner, and just in certain spots where I want some rust runoff coming off that. And again, I'm using that flat chisel type brush like I used earlier to do the rust. Here you can see with the brush motion, I'm just adding a little bit of that oil just in certain spots. I'm not trying to completely coat all those areas. I just want it in certain spots to enhance the rust. Just make it another interesting effect, making it look like some of that rust is starting to branch off a little bit and is trying to kind of run down the areas of the car. Now we'll do the bay pitting, and this is a really unique effect. You see a lot of times on these older 4750s, a lot of grain cars, they get these rust pits on the sides. A lot of those soybean cars too. The way I model this is just by using a fine tip Sharpie. These could be very quickly purchased at Hobby Lobby, Walmart, any craft store will have these. They're super cheap. You get them in a pack of 2 or 4. And what I do is, with a zoomed up shot here, you can see I just apply in a random manner these little dots. I just go all over the bay to apply these dots, and we'll further weather this up and blend this in, but this is just a great way to model those little pits. And a lot of times this is from hammering on the bays, it's from vibrators I believe that they use during the unloading process. I'm pretty sure that's what it is. Someone else would probably know more about it. But again, that's something you see a lot on these old CSX 4750s. It's something I wanted to replicate, and the Sharpie makes quick work of this little technique. Alright, the final weathering touches are going to basically be patchy rust, and this is going to be a really unique weathering effect that I don't think I've ever demonstrated before, but effectively what you're going to do here is make another dilution of acrylic paint, just like what we did before for the base grime. And I'm actually going to take a little bit of that burnt umber oil and mix it in with my earth brown and black, and I'm going to make a darker rust color, kind of matching what we've done with the rust on the sides. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to make some random little patches of this paint on the sides. I'm just going to build it up slowly with the airbrush in certain spots to create heavier patches of rust where I want it to be, sort of based on what it looks like on the prototype car. You can see it's kind of built up around the CSX logo there. It's sort of built up on the end slope sheet there on the ends. So it's just being applied in a random manner here. You can see I'm streaking it across just in certain little areas. And right now I know you guys are thinking, oh my god, he's screwing up the car. Don't worry, this will all make sense in a second with this following technique. Right now I'm only worried about applying the paint, and it does not have to look pretty at all, believe me. You just apply a nice thick heavy layer of this paint to get you started. And don't worry about the finish, we'll fix it later. I'm just applying the paint in certain spots. I might also apply some of this paint to the top. I believe I do here in a second, but right now I'm just worried about fanning the paint out a little bit on the sides, just where I need it to be. Once I've built it up, I can determine if I want to add more or not, and in this case I've decided to go ahead and make it a little bit heavier for demonstration purposes. Also, because the photo I have of the car is from a few years ago, I'm going to model this with a little bit more grime and a little bit more dirt to pretty much bring it more up to date as to what it would look like now. And here I in fact do go, and with the remaining paint in my cup, I decided to go ahead and start hitting up those hatches again, and I really just wanted to darken these up a little bit, make them less white, and just make them look a little bit more grimy, kind of blend them in a little bit more with the car body there. Just kind of darken them in a little bit. Now, I went ahead and dull coated all of those little spots up top, but on the sides I did not seal these in yet, and this is why. Here I'm using a wet Q-tip dipped in water. Make sure it's water, not alcohol. You do not want to strip the paint here. I've just lightly damped the Q-tip in the water and then dried it off on a paper towel, and I'm taking the slightly damp Q-tip and I'm rubbing it over those areas of paint that we just applied to give me this really interesting patchy rust effect. This is very realistic on 4750s, especially older cars where they get this really heavy patchy rust. I've never seen anyone try to model this rust before, and the attempts that I have seen could be better. There are some kids that are doing this pretty good, but I just wanted to go ahead and demonstrate this technique on one of my cars to get it out there and let you guys really see how to do this. And again, you just kind of scrub it in a random manner and peel some of that paint up. I go pretty heavy on the one end here, as you'll see. As I start to take that paint off, you can see very quickly it starts to peel off in layers. And you do got to be very careful how much pressure you're applying, because I definitely started to take off a little too much paint here. You see it started to lift off very, very quickly, so I had to try to compensate by taking more paint off than I initially wanted. But once you're satisfied with the effect, here you can see you get this really, really nice effect, and it really adds a whole other level of grime and detail to the sides. It's very realistic and again very prototypical to what's seen on the real 4750 that we're replicating. So again, I sealed all this up with dull coat, and after I did all this, I then applied the trucks. I weathered those with earth brown acrylic and black, and now we're ready for powders. And this is going to pretty much be the wrap-up portion of the car. We're going to go in here and we're just going to go ahead and start applying the powder to the trucks. This is going to be some earth brown powder here, as you can see. Okay, I'm just going in and I'm just brushing this right onto those trucks. I'm working it over the areas over the wheels too, so if a little powder gets in there, it's not a big deal. It'll just brush in and it'll just look really, really nice. It'll just enhance all that overall. So here you can see, again, I'm just brushing over the trucks there, and I'm going to also hit the couplers too a little bit. I might also apply some of this powder to the kick-up lines and other little areas where need be. And to finish up the trucks, I'm just going to go in and I'm going to apply a little bit of mud splatter to the base of the truck frame there, just with a little bit of acrylic paint. Now to wrap up, we'll compare the prototype here. There you can see what we were trying to go with. And now we get to look at the completed model. And take a look at this. With all of the completed effects, we now have a super realistic prototype model. All the effects came out super nice. The truck weathering, the side weathering, and all of our decal work just came out super, super nice. And I'm super satisfied with the weathering on this car. I want to thank you guys for watching this video. I hope that these techniques inspire you to try some of these on your own. Leave feedback below, and also stay tuned for more weathering videos in the future. Take care, guys. Thank you.